Now, I'm just gonna. Greetings, everyone. Welcome to another edition of OneEarth Dialogue, a monthly series which brings together changemakers from the various sectors set out to make a difference in climate, sustainability, and ESG. Through this event, we aim to bring out an elaborate panel discussion with industry experts who will be sharing their experiences and expertise on energy transition in India and its various innovations and challenges. This event is in partnership with AV Hunt. I would I would now like to introduce the moderator of our panel discussion, Mr. Vijay Prateek, the founder and CEO of Demitas. Demitas Energy designs and manufactures a new class of engine that generates power extremely efficiently, reliably, and inexpensively, and is capable of storing grid-scale energy for long durations with negligible losses. I now hand over the floor to you, Vijay.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I'm Vijay Prateek, founder of Demitas Energies, and thank you, Nash, for giving me the privilege of moderating this event. Let me introduce our esteemed panelists who would be talking to us about the topic of transitioning our economy, the global economy, from a fossil-based economy into a renewable-based economy. Our first panelist is Smitha Ari. She's the Senior Vice President of Octus ECG. She's a finance professional with over 16 years of corporate and entrepreneurial experience. She's worked across sustainable finance, ESG, corporate banking, impact investing, and investment banking. Her expertise lies in product structuring, financial analysis, and research in sectors such as financial services, clean energy, skilling and livelihood, and agriculture. Currently, she takes care of projects, designs, and development of financial products, research, and partnerships across sustainable finance, ESG, and climate strategy. Welcome on this event, Smita. Our second panelist is Shishir Garimela. He is the head of International Business Development, PV Evolution Labs. He's an experienced business leader in the field of solar energy and financial services. Through his venture Sunwest, he has done pioneering work in residential and SME focused rooftop solar, both in urban as well as semi urban India. He has previously worked with L&T Financial Services, Barclays Capital, and General Motors, both in India, UK, and Canada. He is the alum of London School of Economics. He derives his inspiration for life through his love for long distance running. Welcome to the show, Shishir. Yeah. Our third esteemed guest is Martin Shardul. He is the policy director, Global Wind Energy Council. He um, he is also a mentor at Terra.do. He has more than a decade of experience in areas of public policy, clean energy transition, data analysis, digital transformation. He has also worked with Terry's Lighting a Billion Lives initiative, as well as supported the UN Sustainability Energy for All, C for All country action agenda. He's been with Terry Roller of Honors 2016. Um, and he has contributed to this unique scientific intervention climate credit pilot project, which leveraged near real-time data to advance climate credits for the mitigation of black carbon. His name was also included in the UN Environment's Phase for Changes 2017 list. Welcome, Martin, to the conversation. So today we would be touching upon the key and a very important topic for our generation, which is energy transition, transitioning our economy from a fossils-based economy to a renewables-based economy. So we've all been hearing just a very brief about this topic, that we've all been hearing about renewables and how important it is for our economy to shift to a renewable based economy if we want the survival of human race. But the journey has been much more difficult than one would have thought. We have been hearing about this for over a decade now, but our economies, except for a few countries, still depend on fossil-based generation. So we will try to understand why has this taking so long, what are the challenges, and how does the future look like. So I would I would start with Martin with a very simple question of why has this transition taken so long? When I was in school more than a decade ago, we were taught about the positives of renewables and the downfall of non-renewables. And still today, our power generation is dependent on fossil fuels. So, why do you think has this taken so long?
Martin, you're on mute.
Yes. Uh, Firstly, thank you for having me here. It's really pleasure to be part of this such a steamed panel here, and I think that today's discussion is quite pertinent because we are already having the COP right now in Egypt, and as the COP summit comes to an end, we are already gearing up for G20. So your question becomes very important, that in the past our transition has been slow because I think the foremost reason for this was there was a lack of confidence for several years in renewable energy. But I think that aspect has largely changed because of huge targets which the government of India has set for itself. And globally the prices of renewable energy technology have drastically come down, and so is the case in India also. So now you see, on one hand we have huge volumes available, which is attractive for the market, for investors, for project developers. At the same time, there is finance available. There is low cost finance available. Why? Because your project becomes attractive. You are giving a ROI which is attractive enough. At the same time, you have off takers available. So there are not just it's not just government pushing, but now it's also institutions and organizations voluntarily coming up, setting out their disclosures and taking up commitments that they would be procuring power from green energy technologies. So I think all of this has brought us to a phase wherein at one point of time, even for off grid solutions, there was no buyer, and the costs were very it was difficult for on somebody's pocket. Yet when there were products available for every pocket, right, even then there was no confidence. From that phase, we have transitioned to a stage where we are talking about large scale utility products, large scale utility solutions for the financing institutions. So I think this transition has really brought the major change. And the most important aspect in the past was that there was no volume available to break down that cost barrier for our investors, for our technology developers to cross that barrier and take a bigger pie in India's grid infrastructure, in India's huge power market. Right.
Fair enough, fair enough. So that makes a lot of sense. Obviously, there were a lot of parameters that had to be fulfilled for this change to sort of catalyze and to actually begin. So definitely economy, finance, they were definitely a very important part of this change. Getting volumes was one, but also I think there was some technological changes that definitely were needed. For
Right.
example, the wind turbines have been around for a very long time. Solar
Hmm.
photovoltaics had been used on satellites and in our calculators even for a very long time, but
Right.
getting them onto rooftops and everywhere now. And if you look at even India, every
Hmm.
every every government building has a solar rooftop. So
Right.
definitely, I think there has been a lot of technical push also. So on this, Shishir, do you think there has been a strong technical aspect that brought about this change? And why? And if so, why did it happen only in this decade? Why couldn't this happen earlier?
Thanks, Vijay, and thanks for having me here. Uh, I think more than technology evolution, I think it is the price of technology that has fallen, as Martin mentioned, and that's been the big difference. If you look at how solar technology has evolved, purely just the solar module technology has evolved over the last 10 years or the last 30 years. In the last 10 years, the difference in efficiencies of a solar panel or a solar cell have not changed significantly. They've improved, of course, but it is the cost that has come down which has really been the driver. And how the cost has come down is just economies of scale and the way China produces some of these modules. So it's not only technology, but a lot of other things around technology that have resulted in the cost falling, and which is why the adoption has significantly increased.
True. So definitely, and we do require such technological changes along with finances and supply chain and all of it. And so, Smita, we would want to also understand how did the financial landscape change. So I remember when I had also started up about 10 years back, it was very difficult getting funds or even explaining why a project like ours would require funds and why the bank should pay for it. But now it's become relatively easier. So, certainly, finance had a very important role in this. What are your takes on this?
Thank you. Thanks, Vijay. Thank you for inviting me on this panel. So, on your question, I would say that the Indian financial sector is in the process of equipping itself. So, for if you look at it from an ESG perspective, just zooming out of the renewable energy lens, So, for example, large lenders like SBI have tightened their ESG policy, and there are banks which are kind of bringing about sustainable finance framework, saying no to coal or fossil fuel based assets. Regulations are also slowly picking up, aiming to kind of enhance the role of financial system itself. So for example, there are recent discussion papers which are out by RBI and SEBI, which are positive steps. Additionally, after the 2017 net zero target was announced, some sectors have come up with their own, ESG and net zero plans. For example, the Indian Green Building Council, their target to go green by 2050, followed by a rating system for net zero buildings. So all this is at a sectoral level. If you zoom in on the companies, I think Martin also mentioned that large companies have started, taking net zero targets, and about 64 companies have already declared this. And if you look at again on the bank side, HDFC and SBI have started putting out targets. So there is significant traction. And looking specifically at the renewable energy sector, the reasons for this traction is mainly, conducive policy support, as well as, so the policy support is the main thing which has kind of pushed the sector itself, and therefore the financial institutions backing the sector. Again, RBI looking at renewable energy as one of the key, PSL, priority sector lending categories. But what is seen in the renewable energy sector is not so visible in other sectors. So to have a national level transition, if we talk of transition, similar measures are needed across different sectors. So efficient regulations, policies, guidelines, to establish an enabling ecosystem for the development of sustainable finance, and also innovative financial products itself. So loans which are linked to sustainability targets, these kind of things. So I'll probably talk about that later. But some of these measures would be, key to enhance India's sustainable finance capacity across asset classes. So we've come a long way, but there is still a long way to go.
Right. There's definitely a long way to go. And very rightly put, it's sort of clean tech tends to be something that is a diversified gameplay. You cannot solely go on one tech or one financial products, or there's no silver bullet to this problem. In every field, you'll have to go with multiple options. So that comes to my next question, Martin, that we've all seen rooftop solar coming up everywhere. We've seen solar being pushed. It is essentially a poster child for renewables today. But I personally believe that clean tech is something. It's a huge problem. Yeah, you can't solve it with one technology alone, or with one country alone cannot solve it. You definitely need finance or access to capital flowing into other technologies like wind, offshore, onshore wind, batteries, etc., etc. So, because you've been associated with wind, what do you think that wind specifically, the wind sector has been getting as much attention, as much capital, or is there still some scope? Also, do you think beyond wind there are technologies like tidal, etc., geothermal? Do you think they are also being focused, or there is some scope for improvement, especially in terms of access to finance?
Okay, so I think to answer your question, firstly, I will reiterate and second my colleagues in the panel that of late the mix of financing in the sector has changed, and of course we have already touched upon some of the reasons why that has happened. So if you see, we have started to see that a huge number of pension funds are now getting invested into India's renewable energy sector. These are long-term financing, so which means this indicates that there is some kind of confidence vested in India's renewable energy sector. We're also seeing, Smita mentioned about ESG funds, which are something new and still in the nascent stage in the country. As we move forward, we really feel that we would be able to harness more of it. But now to answer your question, see, in the past few years, renewable energy became synonymous with solar technology. And I think here was the mistake which we committed as a sector or as a country or as a region or largely as the world. Now, off late, when we have started to announce our net zero targets, as the need for agreements during Paris Agreement has have become more obvious. We have started to appreciate the fact that we need a diversity of fuel. Whether we talk about the business as usual scenario or whether we are talking about a net zero scenario, wherein we are drawing power only from non-fossil fuel sources or from renewable energy, we need to have a diversity in our fuel mix. Why? Because we want to ensure that we have, number one, power availability 24 into 7, which means reliability. We also want to ensure that we have adequate amount of power available. If we look into statistics, then in 2010, India's power demand stood at somewhat 700 terawatt hour, which is going to be more than 2100 terawatt hour by 2030, which means that huge surge, more than almost close to two times. So uh, it really indicates that we really need to ramp up. Why we need to ramp up? Number one, because we have to transition the existing power demand from thermal to renewable energy. Number two, there are new demand centers that are evolving. For example, hydrogen. Now, if we see into statistics, then to be able to meet the national hydrogen mission target of 2030, we need almost 115 gigawatt of green energy capacity, right? We have the current installed capacity of 118 gigawatt, which means we really need to ramp up if we want to adequately cater to needs of all sectors. Now, this implies that diversity of fuel is not just important for energy security, it is not just important for our adequacy, but it is also important to be able to ensure that we are not left out. If we don't act now, we will be left out, because there are organizations and institutions that are now forging partnership for steel zero, for responsible steel, responsible cement, and so on. So if we want to tap markets in the US, in the Europe, then we also have to follow the trend. We have to see that how we are able to meet, compete, and our offerings, whether it is exports good or whether it is services, it remains competitive in the international market, and we are able to bring enough trade surplus for us. We are able to generate enough trade surplus. At the same time, as a company, as an organization, I'm able to generate even enough revenues for myself, expand in terms of my footprint. So that realization has come now, and as the Global Wind Energy Council, across various platforms, we have been advocating for a partnership and complementarity between various renewable energy technologies. Couple of days back, we have forged Global Renewables Alliance, which where you'll find long-term battery solutions, people from hydrogen, people from solar, people from geothermal. So all of us have come together to forge this alliance, and I think this is something which is going in the right direction. This is something which we wanted always. So at the international level, this is a new update that has happened of late. At the national and subnational level, we already have a policy which is called hybrid wind solar policy, wherein with some amendment, the government of India also ensured that battery storage is also part of it. So now we are able to exploit this hybrid technology, hybrid solution, hybrid policy to be able to ensure that we are able to see higher CUF, capacity utilization factor, from our renewable energy facility. So which means renewable energy becomes more attractive, it becomes more competitive as compared to thermal solutions. And if you see in terms of investment, then even in 2015, the kind of capacity addition that happened in case of fossil fuel was much higher as compared to RE. But if you see 2021, then between 2015 and 2019, just in few years time, we will see that almost double the capacity of thermal we have installed in the country from renewables. So, and this trend is only going to increase further. The government is already exploring geothermal in some pockets of Ladakh. There is a pilot that ONGC wanted to undertake. So I think now a momentum is building, and we are trying to exploit each of the technologies. We are also seeing that how pumped storage can be leveraged. But having said so, what I want to really mention here is that now is the time that we have to derive business value out of various permutation and combinations of these renewable energy technologies. So pump storage might not provide the same service which wind might provide. And we also know intermittency of renewable energy technologies. So we have to see that how we are able to create a mix which is optimum for a sub sector within a particular sector. For example, railways within the transport sector, road transport within the transport sector, and so on. And that's why we have tenders calls, for example, round the clock, peak power tenders. So we are also innovating in terms of the kind of tenders that we are seeing. We are seeing innovations in terms of tariffs. For example, pumped hydro is for long-term storage, and lithium might not provide long-term storage. So we will have to see different kinds of tariff, different kinds of business models for each of these technologies. But at the same time, like I said, it is not whether whether it is solar progressing or wind progressing. I think we have to ensure that our RPO targets are met, and in fact, we are able to exceed those targets at the national level and at the sub-national level going forward. Thank you.
Yes, that was very insightful and very rightly said. It's not a race between technologies. You need to meet the target. That is the essential agenda. But Martin, from whatever you've talked also, one of the thing that is sort of evident is we tend to typically talk, when we talk about renewables, we typically tend to talk about big projects and large plants like geothermal plants, wind plants, pumped hydro, whatever they might be. But if you look at it, even rooftop solar, for example, they play a very important role. They might be small in capacity, but cumulatively, they are also huge resources for us. Similarly, in industries, if you look at waste heat recovery systems, individually they might be small, but cumulatively, that is a very important aspect of our economy. If we could just save or generate energy from these sources, that would also help our economy transition to a net zero economy much quicker. So on that note, Shishir, I would want to see what your opinion is about rooftop. So we've had a lot of solar plants coming up, a lot of projects coming up, high profile projects. But rooftop solar has more or less been towards organizational customers. It's been mostly B2B, mostly governments, large organizations. For example, my house does not have a solar rooftop, so it's not really gathered momentum in terms of individuals. So what do you think, is that a good sign, or does that need to change? If it needs to change, what should we be doing?
Right. I think there are a couple of dimensions to this. Firstly, you need to understand how power works in this country. It's a concurrent subject on the constitution. So both the center as well as the state have a say, and because of that, any last mile work is always harder than centrally deploying a scheme through a central government. So that's one reason. Second is obviously the economies of scale for larger plants is better than smaller ones. That's why you've seen that take off sooner than the residential small CNI kind of a segment. The other important factor is to understand how power tariffs actually work in this country. If you break down the consumer, there is an agricultural consumer, there is a resi consumer, and there is a commercial and industrial consumer. More often than not, it is the commercial industrial that is subsidizing the agriculture and the residential customer. So there is a good chance that the electricity bill you and I are paying at our house is not truly the representation of what the power tariff may be. And because of which the tariffs are lower, and hence the economics of going solar is not as interesting as for a industry or for a government, right? Government obviously has different reasons to want to deploy solar, but specifically purely from an economics perspective, an industrial customer in India or a commercial customer in India is will get a far better ROI than an investment in the residential space. Now, while we all speak about green energy and changes and lifestyle shifts, uh, consumer adoption really happens at the right price point. I've been promoting residential solar far before its time in India. And what I've realized is that over the last 5 years, I mean, if you're talking about rooftop solar in India for the last 15 years, you see what LEDs did. You see what, when I say see what they did, I mean the kind of noise that they made and the faster adoption that they had, right? Look at LEDs or look at electric vehicles, the two-wheeler and three-wheeler vehicles. So a lot of the last mile Indian consumer behavior is determined by the initial outlay of cost that they are putting into this, the ROI, the return on investment, and how easy is it for them to adopt something like this. Now, in all these three dimensions, solar has typically found it hard. So a couple of lakh rupees to put down solar at your home, that's a challenge for most people in this country. Second is the return on investment is anything between 3 to 7 years, which is again very long. And finally, to install solar in your house, you have to take a million permissions and go through a whole bunch of channels, which you may not have to go through as a individual customer, but at least your installer has to go through. This is a project kind of an experience as opposed to buying a bike, going to a nearby dealership and buying a electric mobility two-wheeler. So all of these things are changing. The economics are getting better. The power tariffs in India, even for residential, are increasing. You'll be surprised that in Mumbai and Delhi, especially in Mumbai, above 500 units in suburban Mumbai, you're paying 14 rupees, 15 rupees tariffs, right? So with that kind of numbers, the economics makes complete sense. But it also has the challenge of consumer adoption, consumer behavior. So you've got an apartment complex with a whole bunch of retired and old uncles and aunties having to decide for solar, and that takes a little bit of a time, right? So it's all of these financial, non-financial, regulatory, and a lot of these aspects have to come together for rapid adoption, right? But I will tell you what, in the last 10 years, I've seen a massive fall in tariff. I have seen, in cost of solar, rooftop solar. I've also seen, even if you don't have solar on your rooftop, at least you know at least one person who does. So the awareness is increasing. It's become far easier now to go solar with subsidy or without subsidy. So a lot of things are changing, but the speed at which they are changing is something that we can control by bettering our policies and ensuring that we can do a few things to ensure that there is a sort of a faster adoption to this. Bringing in quicker financing and bringing in more standardization of equipment as well as the process. So if you bring that all together, you will see even the last mile adopt. And one last point is you'd be surprised. A lot of the market dynamics happens out of need and just the desire of the customer. So it is the rural India that actually first saw solar, right? In terms of lamps and lanterns and water pumps. So where, I mean, in a capitalistic environment where there is an opportunity, the capital and the demand, the supply will flow to the demand.
True. A lot of demand has changed. The entire landscape of solar has changed. Initially, 10 years back, it was rural predominantly, as you pointed out. Now it's urban. So a lot more has changed in the last 10 years. I remember when I jumped into this sector. This was pretty much run by old people. Everyone was seemed to be above 50, and it was predominantly male driven sector. In fact, I used to joke to my friends that my dating life has suffered because of this. I'm always surrounded by old men, and but now that I look, there are a lot of young people jumping into this industry. Even though this is a risky industry to be in, a lot of young people are finding challenge and they find this interesting. So Smita, do you think this is a good change, a welcome change? And what are your insights into this change that we've seen over the last 10 years? And a corollary to that, we've also seen a lot of women joining the force in this. You being a woman in this sector, what are your thoughts on this?
So, of course, it's a favorable situation. So, green or climate change has become the watchword, for the coming generation. So, for instance, within ESG, the hiring trends have seen a remarkable uptick. Demand for ESG or clean kind of jobs in India has grown about over 400%, I think, over the last 3 years. So many young people are consciously steering clear of oil and gas sector related jobs. There's also a lot of activism which has emerged, right? So students at, say, University of Leeds are demanding a ban on university investments in oil, gas, coal kind of sectors, as well as refusal of funding such from such sources. So this trend is only going to increase, especially when education universities are introducing climate change and sustainability kind of modules in the curriculum. International agencies like ILO, for example, they're also heavily engaged in such matters. So at COP27, ILO has launched the first Green Jobs for Youth Pact, which kind of aims to close the skills gap for young people in developing countries and targeting climate vulnerable sectors. The RBI in India, so in the recent discussion paper, has also indicated a need for capacity building within financial institutions, bankers, etc. So that's the other side where skills enhancement is also being recognized as an important factor, and this has potential to drive important changes. For example, forcing financial institutions, companies, etc., to revisit their sustainability oriented action points. Another angle is increasing awareness among consumers. So pressure from peer groups, investor awareness for climate proofing, capital raising, and these kind of aspects. So going forward, in order to attract talent, businesses will also need to realign their way of thinking from hiring perspective, also their internal practices, with respect to environment, etc. And when you talk of the women aspect, what you spoke, uh, organizations and individuals alike are becoming increasingly aware of the gender equality. So, in fact, women empowerment is actually the real progress, right? Now, while conversations around gender have grown, gender representation and equity is not at a level where one would imagine it would have gone, given the increasing amount of dialogues around this. So, in terms of challenges, the conventional mindset, that men are the bread earners, women are the nurturers, so to say, it still continues even in today's day and age. So, in fact, I remember reading a survey sometime back which said that Indian men devote only 97 minutes for unpaid care responsibilities, and that same number is about close to 300 minutes for a woman. So while organizations are providing flexibility programs, etc., there is still not enough support, I would say, to nurture women to through the career life cycle. And even today, in fact, there is a dearth of women in senior roles, right? Like board representation and things like that. And also there is a whole issue of mainstreaming gender into business. So is gender being taken into account during new product development? Are services tailor made to suit women or in an industry which is predominantly male oriented, so to say? So answering these questions as a part of business strategy or models will be very key. Just an example, women are also, when you look at climate change, and since we're talking about renewable energy, etc., women are often disproportionately vulnerable to the effects of climate change, and especially women in developing countries, facing significant challenges, inequalities, and things like that. So, what can be done as solutions? If you look at the corporate side, providing opportunities to return to work, after career gaps, equal opportunities around pay and flexibility, so to say. In fact, at Octa CSG, the firm I represent, about the gender ratio is about 80-20 in favor of women. So I think so that is from a corporate standpoint. Now, from a development perspective, access to finance and innovative financial products which are tailored to women, keeping in mind the needs of women, etc. Now, all this also has an impact on the development outcomes. So, in a sense, I think what I would like to say, concluding the whole thing, is gender inequality needs to be considered, as less of a choice and more of an inevitability, at all levels, and it needs to go beyond lip service and providing women the space and opportunity to succeed.
Right. So, true. Moving on to Martin, there's a lot of young people who might be watching, who definitely are watching this event. But for younger people, especially who are not in this industry, a lot of this jargons, a lot of these conferences, they can seem overwhelming. So, could you just very, very briefly, very quickly, just help us understand what this COP27 is that had just recently happened, and why is it important for us, for not just the renewable sector, just the general public also? Because we've heard of Paris Agreement, Kyoto Protocol, a lot of these things, and they tend to repeat themselves. So, what is so special about COP27, and why is it important to us? Very quick.
Well, I think it the discussion on what is COP and why COP is important, it will itself take a session. In fact, a day for all of us to touch upon all facets of it. But I think the larger premise of COP lies in the fact that human beings have been responsible for climate change, anthropogenic climate change that we are all witnessing. But even if we don't consider the impacts of humans, still there are certain feedback loops, both positive and negative ones, which have been impacting and have been infusing climate change. What is more concerning for us at a subnational level, at a national and regional level, or at a global level, is that we have started to witness climate extremes more often, and the evidence is now available for us that climate change is real, and all of us are equally impacted. If I may put it in terms of taking and building upon a quote from Nelson Mandela, then I would say that Nelson Mandela mentioned prison, treats everyone equally, and I would say that climate change treats everyone equally, irrespective of whether you are geographically located or how you are, placed socially or economically. So all of us are equally impacted, but of course, the most vulnerable ones are the poor people, those who are living in vulnerable areas, those who are poor. So now coming back to the context of COP. So now this understanding makes it important for us to appreciate the fact there have been few pockets in the world who have been historical emitters, who have contributed largely to anthropogenic climate change or human-induced climate change, while there are few pockets that have traditionally or historically not been emitters, but now they are of late huge emitters, and India happens to be one of them. When I talk about historical emitters, then it is the West, the US, the European countries, and still we have countries, the least developed countries, small island developing countries. We have African countries which have, not contributed to climate change as much as industrialized nations have contributed. So, taking note of all of that, COP becomes important for us to be able to appreciate and to be able to do justice to everyone, irrespective of whether you have been traditionally been the emitter, you are currently the among the top emitters, or you are among those who don't have huge contribution to global climate emissions, GHG emissions, or CO2 emissions, or whatever it is. So, taking note of that, now some of the COP editions have been really historic ones. Kyoto Protocol, of course, was an important one. The COP 2015, COP 25 happens to be a historic one. Why? Because it was also in the same year when we decided on signing the SDGs, right? Sustainable Development Goals. And COP 25 also becomes important because this was a landmark uh, uh, agreement when countries came together and they voluntarily said that we would be taking our own targets by ourselves. So we will set our targets by ourselves, and then will remain accountable. So after few intervals, there is a provision for taking a stock taking of how we are progressing. At the same time, it becomes important for me to mention that COP is about three basic elements. It is about climate mitigation, which means we want to cut any further GHG emissions or CO2 emissions or whatever it is. So any kind of emissions that lead to furthering of climate change. At the same time, we also understand that we have pumped enough GHGs. We have, and apart from human infusion, there have also been climatic cycles that have led to climate change in some ways. So that is already going to be there, and that is going to impact in some ways or the other. For example, through floods or through changes in rainfall patterns or precipitation patterns and so on. So which is at the end of the day going to impact our farmers, our agriculture, our economics, poor people, and so on. So we need to adapt to those, right? And then of course is financing for each of these facets. Now COP 27 becomes important because for a very long time the developing countries and the least developed countries, while they have already been advocating, and they are very much right, when they say that we have not been historical emitters and there should be climate justice. So on that note, there should be equally viable and appreciated provisions to ensure that loss and damages that are going to happen because of what has happened in the past, what we have already emitted in the atmosphere. So we should also acknowledge that, and that should be whether certain kind of financing mechanism should be put in place to able to help communities, institutions, and countries to deal with that. While we also have to understand that in COP 25 there was $100 billion commitment made by developed countries, and in the past few years they have not been able to fulfill that commitment. We have also seen that in the past few years there have been regional and global events that have been really troubled times for all of us. So it's important that if we have to adapt to climate change, if we have to mitigate, then certainly the costs have to be brought down. There have to be facilitative mechanisms for everyone, whether it is in the emerging economies, whether it is in the developed countries, or whether it is in the developing nations. Now if I talk about India, if we have to transition to renewable energy technology, then we need at least a financing of around $300 billion, and we would be needing another $200 billion to put adequate amount of transmission and power evacuation infrastructure in place. So you see the kind of financing that we need to be able to accommodate our RE utility scale RE project needs between in this decade. So it becomes important for us to see that how COP helps us in leveraging finance, not just for our country, but for a region as a whole, for global South, and this financing is made available, and our technologies, for example, offshore wind is something new that we are going to see in the coming years in the country. But because the cost of technology during the initial years will be much high, so and we are already having tenders that bind us to and force us to compete on the basis of tariffs. These tenders do not appreciate the complementary role of technologies, right? So if solar is available, let's take a hypothetical situation that solar is available for 50 paisa, and wind is available for 30 paisa. So then anybody would want to invest in wind rather than solar, right? Or you can reverse the case. So instead of working on the value that we derive through a combination of these technologies, we are currently competing on tariffs. So how do we deal with this? Again, to be able to deal with this, we need financing which can help us in cutting these kind of price differences, price barriers which exist. We need to ensure that there are mechanisms available so that discoms who have been prohibitors of green power uptake are appreciating green technology, and we are able to make good progress as we move forward.
Right.
Thank
Thank
you.
you for the description, Martin. That's very important. And so, when we talk about COP27 and all the pledges that a lot of nations have made, it becomes very evident moving forward that these are all ambitious targets. Surely they are achievable, but they are very ambitious. And what I personally, being in this sector, have realized that it's not going to be one, as we discussed earlier in the talk, not it's not going to be one or two technologies that's going to help us achieve those. It's going to be a multitude of various technologies, various policies, various financial instruments, and all of those. So, in today's world, batteries have definitely taken center stage now. Solar and wind are extremely intermittent, they're very unpredictable, unreliable. And moving forward, if we need a zero emission economy, we would definitely need a storage system. And battery energy storage is one of them. Of course, there's pumped hydro, there are a lot of other computing technologies. So, especially Shishir, for you, since you are in the solar business, how do you look at battery energy storage systems and various other fluid batteries, for example? What role do you think they play in our future? And even for rooftop, like this Tesla Powerwall, do you see a market in India, and do you think they're going to be critical moving forward?
Sure. Uh, as you rightly said, the intermittency of wind and solar, especially at a decentralized level, solar has so much intermittency that battery would be required. If you truly want to have, to be away from the grid, or at least as much as possible away from the grid, or not be dependent on the grid. That's what I mean. Battery technology would be important, but I think battery technology has a few facets that one need to understand. Number one is much like solar itself, a lot of the battery technology depends on what chemistry are you using and what metals and what the fundamentals of the chemistry. And again, in this space, there has been one country that's taken over a lot of the supply chain. So, will storage or battery be a repeat of solar or not is something that we need to be very wary of. Number two is uh, different battery technologies are available for different use cases, and some require high cycles, some require high safety. For some, cost is very important. So I think speaking of batteries in general is very loose. One has to really understand. Uh, I think we are still a few years away from mainstream battery penetration. Have I seen projects where it has helped? Absolutely. But I've seen projects where a solar and storage has a much better economics and benefit to the planet than the current diesel generator, right? But will your house and me, and like, will we take Powerwall at this stage? Probably not. And the reason why people are taking are adopting the Powerwall is in the US is a couple of reasons. Number one, because of the California and a few other fires, folks have seen shutdown for 2 day, 48-hour shutdown 6 times over the last few months. So that kind of an experience makes you realize that I want to be completely independent if possible. Number one. Number two, the electric vehicle adoption in the US is significant. So the battery, the solar, and the EV comes together. So my point is that battery as a technology will play a very important role, but it has to be a part of an ecosystem that will naturally form. Solar will be the generation. EV will be a very critical component. There'll be IoT devices. All of this has to come together. And at that point, what technology makes sense and what is the cost barrier and the safety? You've been hearing all sorts of stories about two-wheeler batteries in India. So safety is a very important a factor as well, right? So a lot of these dimensions have to be taken care of before we can truly see battery technology being adopted at the last mile level.
True, yeah. So, we would definitely want to see batteries coming in. It is going to take time. We don't want Samsung battery fire happening across our houses for sure. So that was a very valuable insight. Wrapping this conversation, I would because there's a lot of young people watching this show. and the future of climate change, of the transition to a more renewable economy depend is in the hands of our of the future generation. So in the end, what would you all if you had to say anything to the coming generation, what is it that you would want to tell them? Is it a worth sector to be getting into versus say the tech industry where building an app is so much easier? Also, everyone is not an engineer. So if you're not in this sector, you're not an engineer, you're not into finance, what is it that you think that the youth can do to contribute to this society in terms of renewables? I would like all of you to answer that, starting with Smitha, maybe.
Sure. So, as it is, it's quite encouraging to see young climate leaders, engaging with global leaders on climate change, global summits, etc. So there is a lot of momentum which is happening. I believe, just to keep it short, education, innovation, and action. This is the way to go. So we are also beginning to see this today. So how education has encouraged those who want to create a change, and how innovation has enhanced that potential, for action. At the same time, I think the onus is also on, the older generation, so to say, to create these enabling environments, and an inclusive society. So armoring the youth with the toolkit, for advocacy and awareness building, will help in climate transition taking the center stage, and that would deliver the impact on multiple levels. Going by a question on, not in finance, not an engineer, what could one do? There are several opportunities, I think, which are opening up, also because the sector itself is opening up in terms of ESG priorities. ESG has now become a buzzword. Everybody's talking about ESG and climate and things like that. So I think discovering that niche for an individual on what works basis. So, for example, in Optus, we have people with sociology backgrounds, who are kind of looking at this whole space just because they have interest. So I think the opportunity is immense. It's just about creating those enabling environments to give the push.
True, true. Martin, what would your thoughts be on this topic?
I'm sorry, I was just texting my colleague. We are having a major launch in a few days. So could you just repeat your query for
Yeah,
me?
I hope the launch goes well. My question was that there are a lot of young people watching this show today, and they would
Right.
definitely want to contribute to this transition in some way. Unfortunately, not everyone is an engineer, not everyone is in this sector. So, what do you suggest? How can a common man, especially the youth, do their part in helping the country, the nation, move in this transition? Do you think there's something we can all contribute?
Vijay, I'll cite an example from my own experience. So in 2012, I went to Bihar to collect data, primary data for my master's thesis. And I then went to, but prior to going to Bihar, I went to Gujarat. So there was a contrast between the data which we had got from the NSSO round published in that particular year, which said like if Gujarat had 91% electrification, Bihar had 19% rural electrification. So you imagine the kind of contrast I saw in the field. And when I came back, that was the year when the world was convening at the for the Rio 20 Plus Summit, another historic landmark event. So in this particular event, there was a high-level consultation group set up by the UNDP, and all big shots that you can think of from the world's energy vertical were part of this group. And there were 10 recommendations made by this group to the summit. And I personally found that out of those 10 recommendations, at most it was one or two recommendations that were useful for India or for any developing country, or for the least developing countries, because most of them said that we should adopt cycling, we should ensure that our homes are more energy efficient. So majority of India at that point of time was unelectrified. A majority of us were living in rural areas. So that was, and most of the people in the country, most of the homes did not have a motor vehicle. And I'm here referring to even a two wheeler, right? Motor two wheeler. So coming from there, you see a set of recommendations when a major population of the globe is still the most least energy expensive community. The recommendation that you are making is not equally appreciating what they're already living. So with that note, I want to mention that the best thing that the youth can do is to equip themselves with awareness. The second thing that they can do is they can ensure that how they become responsible in all facets of their life. It is easier said than done. So I think to facilitate them, we have to see that how our infrastructure is green, how our power generation itself is green. So if that is green, at the consumer end, I will remain responsible. But I think number one is to make ourselves aware. Number two is to see that how our own actions are contributing to climate change, whether at the global level or at the national level, or even at the subnational level or local levels. And the third important thing happens is to actually get into action. We can all attend events, we can all read about it, we can see somebody being on Better India's videos and other such social media platforms. But I think the best thing to do and the best example to set for ourselves is us, nobody else. And I think the real confidence will only come, and we will feel happy about being in touch with nature, or being somebody who's using renewable energy technology, when we are doing it ourselves. So I think these are the only three recommendations which I would give. And because young people are most digitally equipped, they are fast learners in comparison to us. So it gives them an immense opportunity to create a community of practice much faster than our abilities. And what they say would be much more appreciated by their community in comparison to what we tell to them. We have already been through that phase with our parents. So now I think we have seen that how what our friends said mattered more for us than what our parents said. So I think they are in that stage, and if they're able to create their own communities, the world is already in good hands.
True, true, true. Very well said, Martin. Shishir, what would your thoughts be on this?
Yeah, on the professional side, look, jobs are going to change. Engineering, coding, anything, any one aspect is overrated. Sales is very important. Try doing a business without selling; it's very hard. And so I think jobs are going to change. Just be adaptable. Just because you are a certain background has really no meaning to what kind of a career you could pursue. So be adaptable. Be a constant learner, and there is a lot more to renewables than just finance or tech. So that's on the professional side. On the personal side, my only request would be to be physically, emotionally, and mentally healthy, because if you're healthy and you take care of yourself, everything around you is much better.
True, very well said, very well said. So I think this was a very eventful talk. I definitely learned a lot, despite being in the sector myself. I hope a lot of young people were inspired with this video, and we do need more people like Smita, Martin, and Shishir, climate change ninjas, who are doing their best to help transform Indian economy from a fossil fuel based to a zero emission based economy. And I wish all of you guys the best in your journey to helping transform our economy. Thank you for taking your precious time out for this event. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very
Thank you,
much.
everyone. Lovely joining
Thanks
you.
for having us. Thank you.
Bye.